The March rain battered against the windows of Alexander Reed's Pacific Heights mansion, a restless percussion that usually lulled him into a rare state of calm. Tonight, though, the storm seemed to carry something else, an undercurrent of restlessness that unsettled him. Lightning fractured the darkness in quick, sharp flashes, briefly revealing the contours of his cavernous study, shelves lined with first edition books, an antique globe, and the unyielding expanse of his desk, buried in acquisition proposals. The amber swirl of expensive scotch sat untouched beside his elbow. At 38, Alexander Reed had the kind of life most people read about in business magazines. A self-made billionaire, the architect of Reed Technologies, a man whose ideas had pushed quantum computing into the mainstream. His was a world of glass towers, precision, and control. Yet the 3 years since Catherine's death had hollowed that world into something colder, emptier. The house was immaculate, but sterile, a museum without warmth. He had learned to fill the silence with work, but tonight, it pressed in from all sides. The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, the chimes reverberating through the vast rooms. He was about to turn back to the contract in front of him when it came, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as his imagination. A cry, high-pitched, human. He froze, pen suspended mid-mark. It came again, carried through the storm. Not the sharp wail of pain, but the thin, trembling cry of something small, frightened, and utterly vulnerable. He set the pen down, listening. The sound drew him out of the study, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor as he crossed the dim west wing. The security panel by the courtyard door blinked its steady green. No breach detected, yet the cries grew clearer with each step, threading through the rain and thunder, leading him toward the six-car garage. The wind clawed at him the moment he stepped outside, rain slicing across his custom-tailored shirt. The manicured garden blurred into shifting shadows as he crossed the courtyard. The garage's side door stood unlocked, an anomaly that tightened his jaw. He pushed it open, and the motion sensor lights hummed a life. In the center of the gleaming concrete floor sat a large wicker basket. He took the slow steps forward, unsure whether to trust his eyes. Inside the basket lay 5 tiny bundles wrapped in sodden pink blankets, newborns. Their faces were small and perfect, eyes squeezed shut. Against the light, wisps of dark hair plastered to their foreheads. 5 identical little girls, no more than a few days old, squirmed and cried, their voices overlapping into a trembling chorus. He crouched, his gaze catching on a white strip near one baby's foot, a hospital bracelet, Vasquez Quintuplets. March 15th. His heartbeat thudded louder than the storm. Tucked into the basket's side was a sealed envelope, edges damp but intact. He tore it open with careful fingers, scanning the elegant handwriting inside. Please protect my daughters. They are in danger. You are the only one I can trust. No name, no explanation. The cries softened as if the babies sensed his presence. 5 tiny faces turning instinctively toward him. In those mirrored eyes, wide, dark, and impossibly vulnerable, Alexander felt something shift. A sensation he hadn't known since the day Catherine's hand slipped from his. The storm raged outside, but it was nothing compared to the quiet storm building inside him. He knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever life he had planned for himself had just been shattered and remade in an instant. The rain hadn't let up by the time Alexander carried the basket into the mansion. The storm had deepened into a relentless wall of sound, wind rattling the glass as if it wanted to come inside. His polished marble foyer, normally silent except for the muted hum of climate control, now pulsed with the tiny cries of 5 lives that didn't belong there. He set the basket down in the center of the living room, the vast space swallowing the sound of their voices, but doing nothing to quiet them. His phone was already in his hand before he realized it, dialing the head of security. The line clicked. Martinez, full sweep, now, quiet protocols, and no police. That last part wasn't impulse, it was instinct. Something about the note's urgency, the surgical precision of the security breach, made his skin prickle. Whoever had done this wasn't desperate. They were deliberate. By the time Martinez's team fanned out through the house and grounds, Alexander had done something he hadn't in years. Sat cross-legged on the floor. One by one, he lifted the girls from the basket, checking their tiny fingers, their breathing, the slight weight of their bodies. His hands, used to signing billion-dollar contracts, looked oddly out of place holding something so impossibly small. The security feed confirmed it. No break-ins, no trip sensors. The garage camera, however, had been disabled for exactly 9 minutes, not broken, not cut, looped. Whoever placed the basket had walked right past his defenses and vanished again. Sophia arrived next, her hair damp from the dash through the storm, arms loaded with bags from an all-night superstore. Formula, diapers, blankets, bottles, things Alexander had never bought in his life. She took one look at him, sitting on the floor with a baby in each arm, and didn't say a word. She just started unpacking. Child Protective Services came in last, bringing with them the official questions and the cold bureaucracy Alexander had expected. Miss Cortez's sharp eyes took in the scene quickly. Mr. Reed, these children will need to be placed immediately. They stayed together. Alexander said without hesitation. That will be difficult. Finding one foster placement is challenging enough. 5. They stayed together. He repeated, the steel in his voice leaving no room for negotiation. Here, for now. It wasn't until she left her approval conditional on an emergency inspection that he realized how strange his own words had been. He'd made them sound like they were already his, but the truth was, in those few hours, the balance of his world had already shifted. The walls of his mansion, once an echo chamber for the ghosts of what he'd lost, now felt alive with sound. Still, the questions burned. Who was the only one that no referred to? Why him? And what kind of danger hunted 5 newborn girls? So dangerous that their mother would rather trust a stranger than the law. When he finally looked down at them, 5 pairs of eyes blinking up at him. In that same unguarded way, Alexander felt the gnawing unease sharpen into something else entirely. Not dread, not even curiosity. It was resolve, and it was only the beginning. The rain had eased into a steady hiss by the following morning, but Alexander's estate was anything but calm. The once pristine foyer looked like a makeshift nursery. Blankets draped over leather chairs, bottles lined up beside antique sculptures, and a faint scent of baby powder replacing the mansion's usual air of cedar polish. He had kept the quintuplets close to him all night, refusing to hand them over to anyone but the trusted night nurse Sophia had summoned at dawn. Martinez stood near the fireplace, his tactical jacket still beaded with rainwater, a tablet in his hands. We reviewed every angle of the perimeter feeds. He began. The intruder was in and out in under 10 minutes. Moved like they knew exactly where your blind spots were. My guess ex-military, maybe private sector contract work. Alexander's gaze stayed on the babies, now asleep in a cluster of bassinets. You find a vehicle. Martinez's jaw flexed. A black SUV parked 2 blocks east. No plates. Our guy stepped out, carried the basket the whole way. And here's the thing, someone else was in the passenger seat, watching the street. But the cameras lose them after that. It wasn't just skill, it was choreography. Planned down to the second dot. By mid-afternoon, the first real lead came in, not from security, but from Detective Luis Rivera, who arrived without announcing himself, just flashing his badge at the gate and walking in like he'd been there before. Rivera was in his late 40s, his suit cut sharp, but his eyes tired. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Mr. Reed, he said, setting the slim folder on the glass coffee table, do you know a Dr. Elena Vasquez? Alexander shook his head. Never heard of her. Rivera flipped open the folder, revealing a grainy surveillance photo of a woman exiting a pharmacy with 2 large bags of formula. The timestamp was from a week ago. She's a geneticist. Worked under contract for Blackwood Pharmaceuticals until 6 months ago, when she dropped off the map. We think she's the mother of these children. Blackwood. The name hit Alexander like a flicker of static across the skin. Years earlier, Reed Technologies had been in a quiet bidding war with them over quantum sequencing patents. Blackwood had won barely, and Alexander had learned the hard way how ruthless they could be. Rivera leaned in, lowering his voice. Her apartment stripped. No sign she ever planned to come back. But we found traces, hidden folders on her old laptop encrypted, every file named after a gemstone. Alexander's gaze drifted to the bassinets: ruby, pearl, amber, jade, opal. The names Sophia had given them. You think she named them, Rivera said, reading his silence. And if those files match the names, it's not just sentimental. It's a message. The detective's phone buzzed, and he excused himself to answer. Alexander stayed seated, staring at the sleeping infants. A storm was building again, not in the sky, but in the invisible space between him, these girls, and the forces that had delivered them to his doorstep when Rivera returned. His expression was grim. One more thing. Blackwood filed a missing person. Report for Dr. Vasquez 3 days ago. But not with the police with their internal security division. That's not concern. That's a manhunt. Alexander leaned back, the weight of the revelation settling in. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever this was, it had just crossed from strange coincidence into deliberate war. The rain had stopped, but the mansion still felt steeped in the electric tension of the night before. Morning light spilled in through the tall windows, revealing the aftermath of chaos. Half-opened formula tins on the counter, diapers in neat stacks like ammunition for a war no one had declared. Alexander moved quietly through the nursery. The quintuplets lay in their bassinets, each one swaddled in a fresh blanket. It was meant to be a peaceful scene, but something about the stillness unsettled him. He paused at Jade's bassinet. Her blanket wasn't one of the new ones Sophia had bought, it was one of the original pink hospital wraps from the night they arrived, faintly damp in the folds, stitched at the edges in a way that didn't match the others. His thumb caught on a small raised seam near the corner, almost invisible. He felt it again, thicker than a stitch should be. Without a word, he carried the blanket into his study, closed the door, and took out a small silver letter opener. The seam parted easily, revealing a sliver of black plastic wrapped in waterproof tape. He peeled the tape back to reveal a flash drive, no markings, no brand. He turned it over in his palm, weighing its importance against its size. This wasn't left there by accident. It was a message, or a trap. He plugged it into his encrypted terminal, the kind built to survive corporate espionage attempts that could cripple entire markets. The screen went black for a moment, then a single folder appeared. Inside, one video file, labeled only with the date 3 days ago. Alexander clicked. The screen filled with the image of a woman in a dimly lit room. Her dark hair was pulled back messily, strands stuck to her face with sweat. Behind her, the faint outline of medical equipment for polls, a bank of monitors, the kind you didn't find in any home. Her voice was urgent, but steady. If you're seeing this, it means I failed to keep them hidden. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. These girls are my daughters, and something more. They are living proof of what Blackwood has been doing. They will never stop looking for them. She swallowed hard, her eyes flicking toward the door as though she'd heard something. You don't know me, Mr. Reed, but I know you. You fought them once before, quietly in the courts. You've seen enough to know what they're capable of. You're the only one I could trust to keep them together, to keep them alive. She reached forward, her face momentarily filling the frame. Don't go to the police. Don't trust anyone in uniform. If you can, find the other files that are named for them. Each file holds a part of the truth. If you can decrypt them, you can end this. A sound echoed in her recording, a sharp bang, then hurried footsteps. Her eyes widened. They found me. Keep them safe, Alexander. Promise me. The screen went black. Alexander sat back in his chair, the faint hum of his computer the only sound. He glanced toward the nursery door, the barrier between him and the sleeping quintuplets. In that moment, the weight of what had been placed in his hands fully settled on him, not just the lives of 5 children, but the key to destroying a corporation ruthless enough to hunt them. And somewhere beyond his gates, the hunters were already moving. By the second night, the air around the Reed estate felt heavier not from the weather, but from the quiet certainty that eyes were watching. Martinez's security team had doubled the guard rotation, infrared sweeps running every hour. Yet, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was after the quintuplets was already inside his perimeter, just biding their time. The flash drive from Jade's blanket still sat in his study safe, but the image of Elena Vasquez's face lingered like an afterimage in his mind. He had replayed her warning enough times to memorize the pauses, the urgency in her eyes. Don't trust anyone in uniform. That alone was enough to make him question every layer of protection he'd built. It began just past midnight. The first alert came from the West Garden perimeter sensors movement in the hedges. A false alarm, the guards thought, until tomorrow. Sensors tripped in perfect sequence along the eastern boundary. It was too precise to be animals. Martinez's voice came over the comms, low and controlled, leveled to lockdown. All units in motion. Alexander was already moving toward the nursery, his steps quick but deliberate. The quintuplets were awake, no crying, just silent, eyes wide as if they too sensed the change in the air. He scooped up Ruby and Pearl, cradling them close while Sophia gathered the others. The sound of distant muffled pops, suppressed gunfire cut through the security feed chatter. Martinez's voice sharpened. We've got 3 inside the outer wall. Gear's military. Moves are professional. They're not here to scare us. From the upper gallery, Alexander caught sight of them on the live camera feed. Dark-clad figures, slipping between shadows, their faces hidden behind night vision visors. They moved like a unit, communicating with brief, economical gestures. Then the power cut. Emergency lights bathed the mansion in a dim red glow, and every instinct in Alexander screamed to move. He led Sophia down a hidden side corridor, and architectural indulgence from the house's previous owner that now felt like a lifeline. The passage ended in a concealed panic room with reinforced steel doors. An independent air filtration. He set the girls into the custom-built crib inside, his mind already racing. If these were Blackwood's people, they wouldn't stop at a failed grab. They'd regroup, escalate, and sooner or later, they'd bring more than 3 operatives. On the comm, Martinez's breathing was heavier now, to down thirds. Gone to ground might have slipped back out. Alexander's eyes flicked to the hidden safe where the flash drive rested. Every second the quintuplets stayed here, without knowing the full truth about Elena's files, was another second of risk. When the all-clear finally came an hour later, the relief was hollow. They hadn't come to kill him. They'd come to measure him, to test his security, his response time, his willingness to fight back, which meant the next time, they'd be ready for him. And in the red-lit quiet of that steel-walled room, Alexander realized he'd need to be ready for them too, not as a businessman, but as a man preparing for war. The second storm in as many weeks rolled in just after dusk, when driving sheets of rain against the mansion's windows like an urgent knocking. Alexander was in the security control room this time, watching the perimeter feeds in real time. Every shadow looked suspect now, every branch sway a possible breach. Martinez's men were stationed at all approach points, heavier weapons in plain sight. At 9:17 p.m., a figure broke from the rain and into view on the east gate camera, a hooded silhouette, head bent against the wind, moving fast. The guards raised rifles, but Alexander's voice cut over the comm before they could engage. Hold fire. Let her in. The gate slid open, and the figure stumbled through, soaked to the bone. Lightning strobed, and for a fraction of a second, he saw her face. Elena Vasquez. The same gaunt features from the flash drive, but now sharper, more haunted. She didn't waste time on greetings. "We have minutes," she said, breath ragged. "They followed me to black SUVs. If they're not here already, they will be." Alexander led her down the hall, past the sleeping quintuplets, into his private study. Water pooled on the Persian rug as she stripped off her hood. "I can't stay," she continued, pulling a small waterproof satchel from inside her coat. "This is the second set of files, emerald and sapphire. The others, I don't have yet." He took the satchel and unzipped it, revealing the more encrypted drives. "Why come here if you're running straight toward them?" Her eyes flicked. "Toward the nursery door, because if they get me, these drives die with me, and so does any chance of proving what they've done." Before he could reply, Martinez's voice erupted over the comm. "We've got movement North Drive. To vehicles, heavy glass, no plates." Elena's shoulders stiffened. "That's them." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a compact pistol, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. "You keep them inside that panic room. Don't open the door for anyone but me." Alexander stared at her, searching for the woman behind the warnings. "And you?" She gave a quick, humorless smile. "I'm the distraction." The next moments were chaos, the thud of boots on wet stone outside, Martinez barking orders, the crack of suppressed gunfire against the walls. Alexander moved fast, lifting 2 of the girls into his arms, motioning for Sophia to gather the others. They descended into the hidden corridor again, the sound of combat muffled but close. Inside the panic room, he set the babies down, locked the steel door, and pressed an ear to the comm. Martinez's voice cut in and out between bursts of gunfire. He could hear Elena too, short and sharp, her orders crisp, professional. Then came silence. It stretched to long dot when the comm crackled again. It wasn't Martinez or Elena's voice. It was a man's, smooth and calm. "Mr. Reed," the voice said, "you have something that belongs to us. We'll be back for it." The line went dead. Alexander's hand tightened on the drives in his pocket. The storm outside had nothing on the one that had just crossed his threshold, and this time, it wasn't leaving. The house held its breath after the men left, as if even the walls were listening for the next step. Rain hammered the glass in a steady roar, but inside the panic room, the sound was a dull, faraway drum. Alexander waited until Martinez confirmed, The SUVs were gone, then unlocked the steel door and stepped out with the drives in his hand. The quintuplets had fallen back to sleep in their clustered cribs, cheeks flushed and damp from the heat of the small room. He stood a moment longer than he should have, counting 5 slow, even rhythms, then turned and moved. He didn't try the main office. He went to the lab he built beneath it years ago, a place meant for market research prototypes, but hardened for something worse: independent power, analog kill switches, air gap systems that had never once touched the outside world. He placed the 2 new drives, emerald and sapphire, in a tray, and looked at the first one's directory tree. Encrypted containers nested inside encrypted containers, each named with what looked like nonsense. It would take his team hours. It took him minutes to notice the pattern: gemstones. Eleanor's first apartment files had all been named after gemstones. Rivera said the blanket drive had carried only a single message. The rest must have been somewhere else, scattered, hidden, waiting to be assembled by someone who knew how she thought. He remembered her voice on the video. Each file holds a part of the truth. If you can decrypt them, you can end this. He fed the first passer's prompt the name Sophia had given the girls. Nothing. He tried the order in which they'd arrived at the hospital according to the bracelet numbers he'd photographed. Nothing. He stared at the prompt as the storm flashed white across the ceiling vents. Then he heard it faint through the floor from the nursery above, a tune, barely a whisper. Miss Patterson humming while she checked the girls, a lullaby. In the video, Eleanor had ended with a note cut off by a door slam. Not words, melody. He typed the title that matched the hum, then the variant name used in South American folk circles. The container flickered, then unfolded like a flower. Documents spilled into view: chain of custody logs, lab notebooks, screenshots of payment ledgers with numbers big enough to tilt small economies, and a spreadsheet that turned his mouth dry: maternal, donor program, neural development pilot, cohort BPND1, donor IDs, not names, clinical sample codes, not faces, an internal memo, cross-reference authorized tissue banks, prioritize samples from high-value targets for brand insulation and potential negotiation leverage. He opened it and found a list of hospitals and private clinics, dates stretching back 5 years, and one line that locked his lungs: donor, source AR 7319, extraction, peripheral blood, consent, N.A., chain, West Bay Private Oncology, clinical discard, notes, VIP anonymized. He scrolled. A cross-link sent him to Sapphire. Without a passer's prompt, Emerald had unlocked the second drive's keys. On Sapphire, a folder labeled validation. Inside, a lab report on 5 infants, dated the week before Eleanor disappeared, each labeled with a gemstone alias that matched the names the babies wore now like happy accidents: Lily, Violet, Rose, Iris, Daisy. He read the analysis twice without breathing. Then he opened the last file in the folder. A simple PDF with cold black letters that rearranged his world. Paternity probability: 99.99%. Putative father, a read AR 7319. For a long moment, he heard nothing. Not the storm, not the hum of the filters, not his own heartbeat. Just the rain-streaked image of a hospital corridor 3 years ago. Catherine's arm threaded with lines, the nurse's cheerful lie about extra vials for the study. A signature he didn't remember signing because his hand had been inside. Hers as she slept. A clinical discard, anonymized, resold in not even for money, but for access. For leverage, because someone at Blackwood had written the word VIP like a name on a fortune. He didn't realize the desk's edge dug crescents into his palms until the sting brought him back. He exhaled once and made himself keep reading. The enhancements Blackwood promised investors were almost entirely performative. Tweaks to promoter regions. Expensive lights around a switch no one really knew how to flip. The infants early. Scans showed normal structure and connectivity, with mild upticks in temporal lobe activation when exposed to patterns. Nothing like the slides with glowing headlines and graphs leaning toward miracle. Blackwood hadn't made superchildren. Blackwood had made a crime and then built scaffolds of jargon around it. A soft knock sounded on the lab door. 3 taps. Pause. To taps the signal he'd given Martinez months ago. For don't shoot, I'm on your side. The door opened and Martinez stepped in, hair still damp from the sweep, jaw set in that permanent way of his. He took in the screens with a soldier's cataloging glance and didn't ask questions. He couldn't unhear. North cameras caught a laser MiG train at the east windows. He said quietly, They weren't trying to get in this time. They were listening. We took it out. We'll pull everything in a 4-block radius by morning. Alexander nodded. Eyes never leaving the paternity line. We won't have until morning, he said, and heard how steady his voice sounded. He could taste the metal in the air the moment before a wire cut, and the lights go dead. They'll try again before dawn, or they'll try to make me come to them. How? A second screen answered. His private inbox pinged inside the air gap like a bird in a steel box. An alert. Only a handful of systems could trigger. The message contained a single sentence and a location for blocks away in an underground lot beneath a shuttered department store. Come alone. Bring our property. No signature. The timestamp matched the last frame of one of the SUV's dash cams. Before the men in them disappeared under the freeway, Martinez swore under his breath. We ignore it. We can't, Alexander said. He'll escalate. Tonight they tested the walls. Next time they test the children. He shut the screen, disconnected the drives, and slid them into an inner pocket sewn into his jacket long before he knew why he'd need it. When he looked up, Martinez had the look he reserved for talking men out of running into buildings on fire. You're the principal, Martinez said evenly. My job is to keep you alive, so those kids have a father in the morning. The word lodged in Alexander's chest like a stone sinking in water. He hadn't tested it out loud. The lab report had done that for him. Father. It changed nothing about what he'd do next, and it changed everything about why. They already do, he said. And in that moment, the sentence stopped being theory and became a fact he could feel down to the bones of his hands. We end this. Here. He didn't go alone. He went looking like he had. Martinez ghosted the steps behind him in black rain gear. Another man flanking the stairs in the dark like a shadow that had learned how to move. The underground lot smelled of rubber and damp concrete. A single sedan idled under a flickering light. The man from the calm, smooth voice, the one who'd promised to come back, stood beside the open trunk, hands visible, smile absent. You brought them, the man said. A statement, not a question. Good. I brought you something in exchange. He stepped aside. In the trunk, a small metal case held a syringe and a portable reader with a brand Alexander recognized. From hospital supply sheets. The man kept talking, steps even, tone bored, a quick draw, a quick match, a quiet arrangement. We'll confirm your stake in the assets and draft terms. Everyone gets paid. Everyone goes home. Alexander took 3 steps closer. He could smell the man's cologne under the oil and concrete. You're going to call them assets. To my face, they are the product of proprietary work, the man said. Created from materials we acquired at considerable cost. You mean stolen from a dying woman's bedside, Alexander said, and enjoyed briefly. Sharply the man's blink. From a tray labeled discard. From a code labeled AR7319. The man recovered with professional speed, but something small and mean flared in his eyes. We can quibble about the chain, or we can keep this transactional, Mr. Reed. He nodded at the drives in Alexander's pocket as if he could see through fabric and conviction. Give us what we need to close our books, and your family remains beloved and undisturbed. A figure peeled from the dark at the far edge of the lot. Elena, hair wet, shoulders squared, a small camera clipped to her collar, and a second compact pistol at her thigh. She'd been in the ceiling crawl space above him the whole time, listening. Her voice carried pure and clean across the concrete. You just admitted the chain, Mr. Pierce. The man didn't turn to her. He didn't need to. He only rolled his neck once as if a knot had tightened. You always were too clever to live long, Doctor. Smile for the microphone, she said, and the red light on her collar glowed brighter. This one has a live uplink. He moved first. Martinez moved faster. Street echoes swallowed what happened in between the brief choreography of a man reaching and another man breaking his reach. The soft thud of a phone hitting concrete and skittering under an SUV. Elena stepping into the light and the man seeing, for the first time, that the world had finally swung in a direction he couldn't buy back. In 31 seconds, a unit that was not the police and not on anyone's payroll, except the one that reads United States, pushed through the stairwell door with a warrant signed by a judge who owed no favors. Rivera followed at their shoulder, eyes hard. He never looked at Alexander, not then. He looked at the man with the smooth voice and said a case number like a prayer. Later, when the paperwork began and the words chain of custody and sealed indictment, started to rearrange futures, Elena and Alexander walked back up the stairs without speaking. The rain had gentled to a whisper by the time they reached the street. At the car door, she put a hand against his shoulder, not to steady him but to anchor herself. "You saw it," she said. "It wasn't a question." He nodded once. "They used my blood. They used your kindness," she said, and her voice broke for the first time all night. "The part of you that stayed in a hospital room until the nurses took extra vials because you wouldn't leave her side. They chose you precisely because you were that man." The mansion was quiet when they returned. Miss Patterson had fallen asleep in a rocking chair with a book in her lap. 5 small bodies dreamed in parallel, soft mouths open, lashes dark against cheeks that held none of the world's ugliness. Alexander stood at the threshold and felt the room move toward him, not with his feet, but with whatever had lit inside his chest. When APDF turned a stranger's children into his daughters, he crossed the floor and knelt, careful not to wake them, hand hovering over the bars because touch felt like a vow he needed to save for morning. Elena stood beside him, eyes on the same 5 faces, a tear leaving a clean line through the grime on her cheek. He didn't need to say the words out loud, they were already in the air. Heavy as weather. "I will not give you back. I will not. Let them name you anything but what you are. Not assets, not experiments, not leverage, children, daughters." Arms dot outside, the storm finally stepped away from the windows and moved on. In its place, the city's night sounds returned distant. Tires on wet pavement, a foghorn low and steady. A clock down the hall clearing his throat before the quarter hour. Alexander stared at 5 pairs of sleeping eyes that would open soon and know nothing of courts, or codes or chains, and he understood the shape his life would take from here. Not solitary, not sterile, not defensible as a spreadsheet. He would be a man interrupted, a calendar broken on purpose, a house that sounded like laughter and arguments and the clatter of too many cups on a breakfast table. He would be a father who had not agreed to be, and then had agreed with everything he had. In the lab, the drives were locked in a safe no one could move without gutting the house. In the street below, a man who called his children assets rode in the back of a car with his hands not free for the first time in years. In the nursery, one of the girls stirred and sighed and said a word that belonged to no one but them. Alexander leaned in, and the word resolved in his ear, simple as breath. "Daddy."